Shalom, friends. There are passages in Jewish teachings that at times may seem theoretical. And then there are pieces of the Torah that become your reality in the blink of an eye. You know, there's a famous teaching in the Talmud called Ketubot, where it says, for example, if a funeral procession and a wedding procession meet at an intersection, which group go first? And the Talmud says, the wedding procession goes first. Friends, let me tell you something that happened in my life today. This teaching wasn't a rabbinic advice, but it was a real part of my life. This morning, my beloved uncle, Rabbi Yitzchok Tiechtel, passed away at the young age of 69 years old. He lived in Pittsburgh. He built a beautiful family, had 11 children, many, many grandchildren. He was a shliach of the Rebbe, who was a living example of a chassid, of a pious Jew, a righteous man for the Chabad community in Pittsburgh. And he was truly beloved by all who knew him. Today, I am also participating at the wedding of my brother's daughter in Berlin, Germany, where I'm speaking to you from right now. This here in Berlin was a place that experienced complete darkness, as this was the seat of the Third Reich that planned the final solution, the annihilation of the Jewish people, right here in Berlin. Tonight, a great light of a beautiful Jewish wedding just took place here, eradicating darkness and creating Jewish pride in a city that thrives with Judaism today. Do you know, at the chuppah, when they concluded the ceremony, the groom stamped on his foot and he broke a glass, and we all said Mazel Tov. And at that moment, when the glass is broken, we are reminded the broken souls who yet wait for a day of celebration and joy. And at the same time, my mother flew back to New York, rendered her garments for the loss of her brother in New York, as she left Germany to leave the joy and the celebration of their wedding, to go back for this funeral. But tonight, a glass broke here in Berlin at the celebration of the wedding. These are two symbols of brokenness, and yet two rituals of beginning. You see, friends, this week's Parsha opens with a dramatic confrontation. After years-long saga between Joseph and his brothers, things have come to an head. Joseph had orchestrated a cunning plan to ensnare his youngest brother Benjamin, to bring him away from his father. And he tells him, he's going to stay with me. And Judah is besides himself because he promised his father that he takes responsibility, that at all costs Benjamin's going back to Israel. And the prospect of this Egyptian prince, Joseph, nabbing his little brother had Judah incensed to his very core. And Judah steps up and he confronts Joseph and he says, let now your servant speak something into my Lord's ears, and let not your wrath be kindled against your servant. And this breaks Joseph's silence. He rips the figurative mask off his face, and he finally reveals himself to his brothers, and he says, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef, your brother. Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? He cries to them. And the brothers then end up giving emotional hugs, and everybody's happy at last. Friends, the question jumps out from the stories, why Yehuda? Why, out of all brothers, is he the one who throws down the gauntlet and challenges the Egyptian dictator? Now, of course, the Torah tells us that he took personal responsibility for Benjamin to come back home, and that's what motivated his extreme behavior. But this itself is puzzling. Why did Yehuda specifically take responsibility back in Canaan to bring Benjamin home, him of all the brothers? I mean, the entire family, after all, needed food. Not only Judah. So why should he be the one to stick his neck out over all the other brothers? Another question is asked. In Jewish law, there's a concept called arvus, which translates loosely as responsibility, guarantor. Largely organic to loan law, the notion states that an arvus is the person that can assume legal responsibility for another person's loan, such that if the original borrower is unable to pay his loan, the arev, the guarantor, is now on the hook for that money. And as with anything else in Jewish law, the Talmud seeks precedent for this concept in the written Torah and finds it in the story of Judah. The fact that he took the responsibility for his brother Benjamin and was thus compelled to stand up for him in Egypt sets the scriptural precedent for the concept of arvos, the Jewish guarantor. Now, while at first blush this might sound like a nifty legal exemplar, upon further examination, it doesn't hold up. Because in the classical case in the classical case of a guarantor, the borrower takes the money and uses it on his own. It's only if he's unable to pay that the guarantor gets involved and repays on his behalf. Contrast that to Yehuda, who was not just a guarantor, but the borrower too. He was the one who borrowed Benjamin and took him to Egypt, not anybody else. He said, Dad, I take the responsibility for him. So how then can the Talmud consider Judah's actions as the local example, of the classical example of arvus, of guarantor from the Torah? And finally, what about Yehuda's profile that elevated him to be the leader, eventually the king of Israel? As we know, King David comes from Judah. In just 1 week's Parsha, next week's portion, we're going to read Jacob's blessings to all of his children, which he uses soaring rhetoric to proclaim. The staff of royalty will never falter from Judah. For all time, the house of David, stemming from Judah, will hold the Jewish throne. And what's more, all positions of leadership, such as the Reish Galusa, the leader of the Jews in the exile that existed in the early days of the Jewish settlement in Babylon, just after the temple's destruction. Who were the leaders? Also the people from the tribe of Judah. And to top it off, you know that Mashiach, the ultimate redemption, the leader who's going to take the Jews out of the exile, he himself, the most singular, important position in all of Judaism. Do you know which tribe he's coming from? The tribe of Judah. Why? What did Yehuda, the head of the tribe of Judah, do to earn this such an elevated leadership status? And in fact, if you recall the stories in the Bible, Yehuda seems to be far from a leader, because he is the one who got the brothers into this whole mess with Joseph in the first place, when he boldly declared, guys, you don't like Joseph? Let's sell our brothers to the Ishmaelites. And it's only barely a chapter later that we read of the episode with Tamar. We remember the story. Yehuda ends up spending the night with his own daughter-in-law, and then he almost kills her. He thought she lived with another man, until he found out it wasn't so. I mean, this doesn't seem the picture of piety. Yet, it is Yehuda who earns the mantle of leadership forever. Why? Now, friends, there are many qualities Yehuda displayed. And today we will focus on one that the Rebbe highlights in a stirring and poignant talk. See, Yehuda cared. One quality personifies the leader over all others, the quality of caring. Yehuda cared, and because he cared, he took that responsibility. Because when you care, you never let your shoulders, you never shrug your shoulders, you never throw up your hands in resignation saying, what can I do? When you care, you do what it takes. When you care, you lead. Yehuda cares. Yehuda does what it takes. And that's why Yehuda leads. Yehuda was never content to let things play at themselves out. Rather, he possessed that crazy positive bug that ate away at him and said, if I see a problem, it's no longer that person's problem, but my problem. And now I must do something to fix it. Friends, this is the most single important quality for a Jewish king or any leader. He must possess an incredible large dose of care. I mean, the type of empathy and emotional connection that immediately transforms the other person's problem into his own, such that he simply won't rest until it's fixed. You see, a Jewish king must be the type of person that if someone is in his care and doesn't have a job, or is sick, or cannot pay a bill, he simply is unable to sleep at night. If you take a better look at Yehuda's life story, this quality will jump out at you. Yes, perhaps on the surface, the stories aren't particularly flattering, but if you read them through a bit closer, a startling quality comes to the fore. Yehuda really cared. Take the saga of Yosef. No one will claim that selling your brother into slavery will win you a Nobel Peace Prize. But the fact of the matter is that the other brothers were seething with jealous rage and were ready to kill him. But because Yehuda cared, Yehuda stood up and said, what use is there to killing him? He's our brother, after all. Because he cared, he searched for any alternative to save his brother and had him thrown into the pit. And because he cares, Yehuda was sacrificing his own comfort for his brothers, letting Yosef live, and selling him into slavery leaves the door open of the possibility that one day, you never know, he might come back to take revenge. Killing him would have been easier, but because he cared, Yehuda didn't do what was easier for him. He did what was better for his brother. And the same is true in the episode of Tamar. Here he was, the rabbi in town, the holy role model, and the leader of the people. Suddenly, he gets the news that his unmarried daughter-in-law is pregnant. How scandalous! How utterly promiscuous! As the presiding rabbi, Yehuda calls the shot, and he sentences her to death. Tamar takes it like a champ. She dons her death row cloak and is ready to meet her maker. But it's only through a completely clandestine and utterly anonymous last-ditch effort that she sends a package to the rabbi to let him, and only him, know that her baby is in fact of his seed. And if he owns up, great. And if not, nobody would be wiser. And Tamar would take her secret with her to heavens in a fiery inferno. What happens? Yehuda receives the package. Now put yourself in his shoes for a moment. You open it up, and what do you realize? You realize what's going on. And to your eternal shame, you say, wow. But to your great relief, you know that no one else knows about it. And the only one who does know about it is about to be burned alive. You can simply roll over for another 1,000 seconds, close your eyes. Your problem will go, maybe the problem will go away forever. No one's going to know. Would you spill the beans? Would you expose yourself to utter shame in public? Would you say that I, the great rabbi and the father of the kings, was the one who fathered that child with that woman? Yehuda doesn't hesitate. He runs into the public square and announces to everyone, it was me. She's pregnant for me. She did nothing wrong. Release her. She's righteous. It's my fault. Because I didn't give my son to marry her the way he was supposed to, she ended up living with me knowing that a holy descendant is going to come from me, from us together, from the tribe of Judah. And that was Yehuda's trademark. He cares, he takes responsibility, and will not let someone else burn for his mistakes. And that's why he was chosen as leader. Because a leader doesn't need to be perfect. A leader needs to be accountable. A leader needs to care. A leader may possess character flaws. But above all else, a leader's caring character must always be flawless. And that was a quality that Yehuda possessed in bucket loads, and the one that made him our leader. And this is also the reason the Talmud considers Yehuda to be the quintessential Arev, the quintessential guarantor, the classic guarantor, for he who was ready to literally give his own life away for someone else. And if that can be the truth with matters of life and death, certainly it can be true with matters of money. Because Yehuda's caring quality is becoming increasingly rare in the world today. You see, too many people operate with a mentally akin to Cain. Remember Cain and Abel in Genesis? And who proclaimed, when God said to him, where's your brother? He said, am I my brother's keeper? Why should I be the one to change the world? Is it my responsibility? I mean, how many stories are there of people losing their lives in public while others shamelessly stand by, filming the event on their phone with glee, eager to share something even more shocking on their TikTok account? Did you know that in the United States, there are no binding Good Samaritan laws? And what does it mean? It means there's nothing on the books that requires a bystander to act if someone else is at risk. You could be experiencing a heart attack on the main street in your town, maybe in Manhattan, Fifth Avenue, or Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles, and a person could be bounding on their chest, screaming help, and nothing in the official code requires anyone to intervene or to try to save your life. This is called the no-duty rescue doctrine. And it even applies when the potential rescuer has the ability, equipment, and expertise to render effective medical assistance. By contrast, in Israel, there's a doctrine, do not stand by your brother's blood, which does in fact require bystanders to administer aid when someone is in a moment of trouble and when it's possible. And in certain instances, bystanders can even be held accountable for for failing to do so. So what Yehuda teaches us is that when you care, there's no such a thing as no duty rescue. It's absolutely your duty. They tell a story about the country of Netherlands. The seventh Rebbe of Ger, called the Pnei Menachem, he had a very devoted disciple, a student, a very wealthy businessman by the name of Rabbi Weinberg. And over 40 years earlier, when Rabbi Weinberg was a young man just beginning his textile business, he began to make successful connections with sheep merchants in New Zealand and found himself spending several months each year down under New Zealand, far from his home in Israel. Now, one of his sisters lived in New York with her family. And on one of his flight back home, he actually made a stop in New York to visit her for a week. Now, this story took place in the late 1940s, when really there weren't many bearded Jews, even in New York City. I mean, in the rest of the USA back then in the early 40s, it was really unheard of for a man to be with a beard and a kippah openly. So he was in New York, and he immediately caught his attention when one day, as he entered the elevator to her sister's apartment, a well-dressed religious bearded Jew, perhaps in his early 40s, also entered the elevator and greeted him with just a cordial Shalom Aleichem, peace unto you. As the elevator ascended, a short conversation ensued. When Rabbi Weinberg mentioned that he spent time each year in New Zealand for his business, this well-dressed Jew asked Rabbi Weinberg, tell me, is there a mikveh, a ritual bath, for family purity in New Zealand? My friend, Rabbi Weinberg answered to this rabbi, I go to New Zealand only to make money. That's it. It's my business. As far as I know, I don't even think there are any religious Jews there. No, they shook hands. Elevator door opened. Rabbi Weinberg's sister was standing there to meet him as he stepped out. And this well-dressed Jew politely tipped his hat to her, and the elevator door closed. Do you know who that was? She asked her brother. That was the son-in-law of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who was the Rebbe at that time. And this man was the Rebbe's son-in-law, who was not the Rebbe. And she said to him, he visits someone here in the building regularly, and they say that this young rabbi is a great Talmudic scholar, and you had real luck to meet him. Okay. 40 years later, Rabbi Weinberg is a very successful businessman, and now he's in his 70s, and he has many grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and he's still very active, he's healthy, and he still regularly traveled to New Zealand for business, and many times made a stop on the way back home in New York to visit his sister. On one of these stops, she suggested, hey brother, why did you go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the leader of the world Jewry at that time? Every Sunday he gives out dollars for charity. And this was many years after Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok, the previous Chabad Rebbe, passed away. And his replacement was his son-in-law. That was the rabbi he met in the elevator 40 years ago. 40 plus years ago. The Ger Rebbe, the Pnei Menachem, really admired the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And it was common for his Chassidim to visit there, to go, his students to visit Lubavitcher Rebbe. So Rabbi Weinberg said, you know what? I'll go visit Rabbi Schneerson. He went on a Sunday. There was a very long line. He was 3 hours, and 10,000 people later, everyone went by to get $1 and a blessing. And all of a sudden, he's in front of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe gives him $1. And the Rebbe tells him, bracha v'hatzlacha, which means you should have great blessing and success. And the Rabbi Weinberg takes the $1, and he thanks, and he walks away. There were hundreds of people in line behind him. Now, he thought to himself, you know what? It was worth the wait. I got a blessing for blessing and success. Those few seconds were such a powerful spiritual moment to stand in the presence of the Rebbe. And he said, you know, my rabbi is going to be very happy when I tell him when I come home to Israel. But all of a sudden, one of the Rebbe's secretaries calls him back. He says, hey, come back, sir. The Rebbe wants to say something to you. Rabbi Weinberg took a few steps back unexpectedly, and the Rebbe asks him, tell me, is there a mikveh in New Zealand yet? Rabbi Weinberg was speechless. The Rebbe's memory was unfathomable. How could a 60-second conversation in an elevator 4 decades ago still be in the mind in the person who interacted with millions, literally millions of people since then? And how did the Rebbe remember him? And the conversation that the Rebbe told him 40 years earlier to build a mikveh in New Zealand, and nothing happened from it. Rabbi Weinberg was at a loss for words. He shrugged his shoulders in confusion, and he said, Rabbi, I don't know if there's a mikveh there. And he continued on his way, with the rest of the dollar line, everybody else progressing behind him. A few weeks after he returned to Israel, he had the opportunity to get an audience with his rabbi, the Gerer Rebbe. And one of the first things he told him was about the meeting with the Rebbe. The Rebbe remembered 40 years later what he asked me 40 years earlier in a mikveh, in an elevator, about a mikveh in New Zealand. And he says it was incredible to the Gerer Rebbe. How could he remember this 40 years? I mean, how could anybody possibly remember a 1-minute conversation of 40 years ago? And also, how did he recognize me? I look completely different. I got a big white beard. I'm not the same person. But he recognized me? What a memory, what an eye. The Gerer Rebbe looks at him, Rabbi Weinberg, piercingly, and went right to the point. He said, that's what you're so excited about? That the Rebbe has a good memory and recognize you? He says, what you should be impressed is that the Lubavitcher Rebbe has been worrying for 40 years about a mikveh in New Zealand. You are standing before a Jew who worries all the time about every Jew around the world and the friends of the Jewish people. And even those who have never heard the word mikveh at the other end of the world. The Rebbe wants to make sure that they have one. Friends, this Friday is the 10th of Teves. Every quality and every message and every element of life has a dedicated moment on the calendar to reflect on that theme. Providentially, this theme about caring for one another really fits for this week, because this coming Friday is called Asara B'Teves on the Jewish calendar. It's a fast day. We mark the fast of the 10th of Teves. We fast from the morning until the evening. Why? Because on this day, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and his army, they laid siege to the city of Jerusalem. They circled the city. They didn't let people in or out, and they set off a chain of events that eventually led to the destruction of the temple. And as the beginning, defining moments of the calamity, beginning of all troubles, we mark it every year with a fast day. And a curious detail about this fast day is often overlooked. Because when the prophet Ezekiel describes the siege of the Babylonian king around Jerusalem, he says the following language. He goes, this very day, the king of Babylon has besieged Jerusalem on this very day. Now, naturally, much of the nuances of the original Hebrew is lost in the translation, but it stands out there. The original word for besieged is samachu, which throughout the entire Torah doesn't translate as besieged. Rather, it means supported, as in the words, Somech Hashem l'chal hanoflim. God supports all those who fall, that we recite in the daily Ashrei prayer. So what is the meaning of this? How does the word support make any sense in the context of a siege? If anything, support is the opposite of a siege. Support upholds, while the objective of a siege is to kill, to plunder. So why does the prophet Ezekiel use this perplexing word with the word somech? On multiple occasions, the Rebbe explained that this siege could have been the best thing that happened to the Jewish people. You might say, why? That brought the destruction of the temple. Because indeed, it wasn't designed to be a tool of murder, but it was designed to be a tool to awaken, to arouse the Jewish people, to once and all rally together, join arms, fight in their army as one. And the siege, destined from heaven on high, was meant to galvanize the Jewish people to support one another and to catalyze them into upholding the light we all bear. As is well documented, Jerusalem, it was destroyed because of baseless hatred. Normally, when an enemy strikes, it stirs the nation that was attacked to come together. And history is replete with such examples. Countries that were torn by internal discord suddenly and vigorously drop all disagreements, and they're united in the face of a war or other challenges from other countries. Take, for example, just recently, we witnessed the world united unprecedented ways of what happened following the October 7th attacks, that terror attacks that was unleashed in Israel by Hamas, and over 1,400 Jews were murdered. And this was not in some foreign country. This was in their homeland. We're in this together, came blaring from every TV channel in Israel after that story. Those from the right, those from the left, and everyone at the center. Biyachad nenatzeach. We're going to win together as one. Because nothing inspires us to support one another like a siege. Nothing harmonizes like being under attack. Nothing unites a family like an outside intruder. So was it supposed to be to the Jews of Jerusalem, to witness the siege, because the siege was designed to support them, to push them to the point at which they would abandon their internal bickering and lock arms to vanquish the common threat. And alas, this did not happen. And before long, as we know, Jerusalem fell and the temple was destroyed. Do you know why? For one reason: people didn't care. The people, so broken and distraught, forgot their inherited Judean quality, the quality of kings, the quality of caring, that even the siege of Jerusalem couldn't shatter their behavior. So as we mark this day on this Friday, Asar B'Tevet, yet again this year, it's a very poignant reminder to take Yehuda's approach for caring, to learn from the siege and rise above all quarrels and bickering, and join as one, together as one family, as friends, one nation with one Torah and one God. And if each of us but cares a little bit more, be it about purifying a mikveh in New Zealand, or about the holy purity of our neighbor next door, with God's help, we will have the temple rebuilt in Jerusalem, with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. I bless you all, friend. May God hasten this era of Mashiach, a time when the world will no longer know of any suffering, a time when goodness and kindness will prevail in this, a time when the words of Isaiah, that those who repose in the dust will awaken and sing joyful praises. It'll be a time when the holy temple in Jerusalem will surely be rebuilt, and the light of God will fill this earth. May it happen speedily in our days. Amen.